Well, hello and welcome to part two of hand forging a small EDC blade. We're going to finish that blade up today if all goes well. It survived heat treat just fine. We're going to get the handle shaped, cut out, shaped, glued on, and we'll sharpen it up and it'll be ready to go. So stick around and we'll get that done. Talk to you in a bit. So we're going to start out with our blade and some black walnut that I sawed out this morning. That's about 1¼ inch by 4 inches by 3/8 inches, and 2 brass pins. Unfortunately, there was no way for me to set the camera up at the drill press or the bandsaw. Basically, all I do is lay the blade on top of the wood. I'll drill through one of the pinholes, set a pin in it, use it to index the rest of the pinholes. I'll mark around the handle, saw it out on the bandsaw. And this is what it should look like, ready to be, ready to start the sanding on it. And we'll have to go to the sanding room and start the sanding. Here we are out at my old Grizzly belt grinder. I don't have any fancy tools, but this one gets the job done. That's a 36 grit belt. It's a little more worn than I like. And what we need to do is finish that edge and put a bevel right there, because that part of the handle is extremely hard to finish once it's along the knife blade. So we're going to switch out and go to a 120 grit belt now. And we're going to go over the areas we've already shaped and just take out all our 36 grit marks and polish it up a little bit. Now we're going to go to a 400 grit belt. I've only got that small area to sand, so I can get by with skipping from 120 to 400. No problem. Just got to be really careful not to burn the wood. And once we get that polished and brought up to 400 grit, we'll be ready to go glue those handles on. And that'll do just fine. Let's go put some glue on. All right, so quick tip, save your cardboard boxes. They come in handy for 100 things. This one happens to be store brand Frosted Flakes. Why? Because I like store brand Frosted Flakes. Anyway, so we're gonna put the handles on this knife. Got our blade here. Our 2 handle halves are ready. Got the pins laid here close at hand. And I'm gonna be using a 5-minute epoxy. I know some guys use the long set epoxy. I use 24-hour epoxy on some applications, but for this style of knife, this will do just fine. One thing to point out is the tang does not need to be glass smooth, or your epoxy will not stick as well. This one, I left a few hammer marks on purpose on the tang just to give it a little texture, a little something for the epoxy to grip to. So let's mix some up and get this started. Just get roughly equal amounts. Better to have a little too much than a little too little. Mix it up. gonna dip the epoxy in the pin in the epoxy. Start it in the handle. Put some epoxy on what's going to be the inside face. Make sure I push it down into the pinholes. Doesn't take a lot, but you do want a good layer. Now I'm going to push the pins out that side just a little. You see I get a good tight fit on those pins. Matter of fact, it's really tight. I'm gonna have to tap that front pin a little bit. So we've got our pins sticking through. And that'll give us a place to locate the other handle. Go ahead and give it a coat of epoxy. Again, making sure to push the epoxy down into the pinholes. That's plenty. Fit the handle on the pin. Got our pins tapped through. Now I'm going to clamp it. Don't have to clamp it tight, just good and snug. If you clamp it too tight, you'll squeeze all the epoxy out and you won't have a good joint. Just snug. Front and back. Look around, make sure I have epoxy all the way around. I do. One thing that I do, you notice there is a little bit of epoxy that seeped out right here. Now, a lot of people want to clean that up because they think it's sloppy looking. One of the purposes of the epoxy is not just to hold the handles in place. Your pin should do that just fine. The epoxy is also, so if this blade's ever washed, it keeps water from getting between the wood and the steel and causing rust. So if I've got that epoxy squeezed out right there, I know I've got a good seal. And most of the time, I just leave it. There's no need in cleaning that up. It's just that one little bit of extra that I like to do. Some people think it's sloppy. I don't. You do it how you like. So we're just going to set this aside for the epoxy to set, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so we're going to try and finish up the knife we tried to finish in the last video. This should be the last part. Hopefully the file doesn't corrupt again. Hopefully nothing crashes and screws up so we can get this video done. Gonna give you a little bit of warning. I did make some screw ups in this video. There are a few things that I'd like to have shown that I didn't exactly show, but I think that most of you folks out there are pretty smart cookies. I think you can get the idea of how it's done. Anyway, let's get to it.